The rain had been falling for hours, soft, unending, like the world itself was mourning something unseen. Daniel stood by the window, his hand resting on the cold glass, watching the blurred streetlights shimmer through the droplets. Behind him, the faint crackle of an old vinyl record filled the silence, a song they used to dance to, once upon a time. It was almost midnight when Emily walked in. She looked tired, not the kind of tired that sleep could fix, but the kind that comes from carrying invisible weights for too long. Her hair was damp from the rain, her eyes swollen but steady. Daniel turned toward her, and for a moment, neither spoke. The space between them was thick, heavy with everything left unsaid. "Dan," she began, her voice low, trembling slightly, "do you ever wonder, when it all started to fade?" He didn't answer. He didn't need to. They both knew. It wasn't one fight or one moment that broke them, it was the slow erosion of time, of words swallowed instead of spoken, of dreams set aside for the sake of being realistic. They had built a life together, an apartment, a rhythm, shared routines, but somewhere in that comfort, they lost each other. She walked closer, her footsteps echoing softly on the wooden floor. "We used to talk about forever," she whispered, almost to herself. "Remember?" Daniel swallowed hard, his chest tightening. He did remember. The late-night talks, the reckless promises, the belief that love was enough to conquer everything. But love, he had learned, wasn't always enough. Not when two people stopped growing together. "I remember," he said finally. His voice cracked, betraying the calm he tried to hold. Emily looked at him then, really looked. And what she saw was not the man who had once made her laugh until she couldn't breathe, but someone worn out by fear, fear of losing, fear of starting over, fear of admitting it wasn't perfect anymore. She took a deep breath. "Do you want this forever, Dan?" she asked. The question was simple, but it sliced through the air like lightning. He froze. It wasn't a question about marriage or the house or the memories. It was about the feeling, the way their hearts had stopped meeting halfway. It was about whether they still saw each other in the same light, or just shadows of what once was. For a long moment, he said nothing. The rain kept tapping at the glass, like it was waiting for an answer too. Finally, he stepped forward. "I want forever," he said, his voice quiet, but not like this. Tears welled up in her eyes. It wasn't anger or disappointment, it was relief. Because deep down, she had felt the same. They had both been holding on, not out of love anymore, but out of fear, fear of being alone, fear of starting from scratch. They talked for hours that night. About the good times. The fights. The mistakes. The dreams they never chased. And somewhere between confession and forgiveness, they found something they hadn't felt in years, honesty. The following weeks weren't easy. They decided to take a break, not as an ending, but as a chance to breathe, to rediscover who they were apart from us. Daniel moved into a small studio apartment across town. The first night alone, he lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling, listening to the silence. It hurt, the kind of ache that sits deep in your chest, but it also felt strangely liberating. He started painting again, something he'd abandoned years ago. Emily, on the other hand, began writing poetry, short stories, little pieces of herself she'd forgotten. Months passed. There were days when they didn't speak. And days when one of them would send a song, or a memory, or a random message just to say, "I thought of you." When they finally met again, it was spring. The air smelled of fresh rain and new beginnings. They met at the park where they'd had their first date, years ago. She smiled when she saw him, the kind of smile that comes after healing, not pretending. "Hey," she said softly. "Hey," he replied. They talked for hours again, but this time it was different. There was no tension, no fear. Just two people who had found their way back to themselves, and, somehow, to each other. "I realized something," Emily said, looking out at the blooming cherry trees. "Forever isn't about never breaking. It's about choosing to rebuild, again and again, with honesty." Daniel nodded. "And maybe sometimes, you have to lose each other to learn how to love right." She reached for his hand, and he didn't pull away. There was no grand gesture, no cinematic ending, just two people sitting quietly under the trees, finally at peace. The night she had whispered, "Do you want this forever?" neither of them knew the answer. But now, they did. Forever wasn't the absence of pain. It wasn't the fairy tale. It was the choice, to face the storms, to grow, to forgive, to change. And in that quiet moment, as the last light of day faded, they both knew, this time, forever meant something real.